Rick looked down at the Elgathri fighter who was hurt. He had sweat and blood on his green scales. Rick got down on his knees next to Dregs, whose breath was short. He took out of his pack a small silver translator that blinks. Listen, Rick was very clear. For the Elgathri, strange clicks and hisses could be heard. Some people will come and burn us all. We have to move quickly or we will die. Drake's eyes got narrow, and he let out a deep, painful, angry roar. He wasn't sure about the person. He tried to move, but his hurt arm made him wince. Rick quickly and easily opened a medical kit. He took care of Drake's wounds. He tightly wrapped them and put a splint on the hurt limb. Drake hissed to get rid of the pain, but he let Rick do the work. Everyone could hear Rick's tracker beeping on his belt. The tips of his fingers touched it as he moved. Time was a threat to them. Rick grunted as he helped Drake stand up. He was heavy from the armor, but Rick put an arm around him to keep him steady. As they walked into the tall bush, roots snaked below them. Rick kept an eye out for traps. Drake took a quick look at the person who had saved him. With each careful step, he gained more respect. When a scream came, it meant that danger was close. Rick listened and then picked a path with plants and solid ground. Although he was proud, Drake limped after him and leaned heavily on his staff. Every step was dangerous. But Rick moved for a reason, not out of fear or training. The strength of humanity came out. Fix things, not rankings. Heal when you need to heal and fight when you need to fight. As the shadows moved, Rick tightened his grip on his gun. The old trees towered over them and were full of dangers they couldn't see. At every step, he could feel eyes on him, ready to kill. With both hands on his gun, Drake dragged his hurt leg next to him. Low growls could be heard in the brush. It looked like the vortex beasts were part of the forest. They were quiet hunters until they caught you in their jaws. Drake's scales were shiny with blood and sweat. They stood with their backs against each other. Rick said in a steady, firm voice, "This is where we stand." Drake's roared, which is a primitive way of showing anger. The sound made Rick brave. As the animal got closer, the forest exploded with wild growls. One jumped out of the brush and attacked Drax. The fighter slammed his tail into a tree and it fell over, killing it. More animals fell when Rick's gun went off. Putting his trust in Drake's, he looked for any shimmer in their disguise. Every time the gun was pulled, there was one less animal to kill. The engines roared above as the shuttles flew by quickly. There wasn't much time left. His cell phone rang with important messages. "Coming in for evac. We sent coordinates. Go there." Drake's walked slowly next to him, and every breath was hard. It had hurt people to fight. Not quick enough. Drake made a noise. Rick quickly put his gun on his shoulder and bowed down. "Move on. I have you." Drake's weight hit hard. Every step hurt, but Rick wouldn't give up. He pushed through the ferns. The beast's cries let them know they would be back, drawn by the smell of blood. The lights seemed to blink ahead, hope and trouble both. Rick took a deep breath, then pushed forward. They were getting safer or more likely to be hunted again with each second and neater. In the dark night, flares go off and their light cuts through the darkness. Rick slammed the symbol for help into the ground. He messed up with the shooter. Sparks flew brightly against the darkness until the signal caught fire, sending flames up into the sky. It was a light in the dark, a cry for help. The human shuttle's engines roared as it punched through the atmosphere. It came down quickly, surrounded by enemy lasers. The Elgathri were aware their lost soldier had been found. There was a loud crash as the ramp of the shuttle hit the ground, shaking everything. Rick's crew members fired bursts into the dark from the trees. Lasers from the enemy went across the sky at night. Even though they were outgunned, humans fired back. Rick carried Drake's to the bus. The planet's gravity was very strong, and Drake's armor made them feel heavy. Rick dragged the hurt man, working hard enough that his muscles hurt. Something shot through the air and made a loud noise. It blew at a tree with so much fire that it turned to ash. A pair of boots banged against metal inside the ship. Drake's was pushed off the deck by Rick. They were pulled in by hands that reached down. As the shuttle took off, the ramp shut them inside. The group worked hard to keep Drake's living. They put bandages on his cuts and closed them up. Green blood was running out of them. Drake's came and went as they fought the darkness. People could be heard through Drake's fog. Sharp and clear human sounds give orders, but they are given with care instead of cruelty. Drake's held on to the sounds like anchors in the dark. They weren't trying to take them over, but kept them safe. The shuttle took off, leaving fire and rubble behind as it went. It took off and went into space. They didn't follow directions and help the enemy. Drake's felt the deck shake, and a doctor put their hand on his head. It wasn't easy to define humans. The engines stopped working. That was all the noise in the small shuttle cabin. Every rough breath was heard again and again. Rick thought a lot about whether to save the stranger. His group looked at each other with doubt. Was one life worth their whole lives? Drake's body was on the homemade cot. It was green blood all over the bandages. He took gasps of air. His scales were no longer shiny. The medical kit was out of supplies. The nav screen flashed red, and very quickly a scary message showed up. Surrender the defector. You must bow down or be killed. The Algothri threat meant death no matter what. Rick let out a sigh and kept the peace. Take Shuttle 3775 to get to Resolute. An incident with a prisoner of war on board. Ask for quick docking to get treatment. Algothri fleet has us in their sights. Rick's trained voice didn't change. Before Admiral Winter's cool voice answered, there was static. Commander, what you did will be looked at again, but first you need to save that life. Authorization given. Please bring your shuttle in. A look of relief crossed the crew's faces, a quiet victory shared by all. Through the windows, the docking bay of the Resolute looked very wide open. The shuttle jerked and then stuck in place. Medics swooped in and around Drake's. They checked vital signs and got ready to move the person. People are healing Algothri, who is hurt. A big difference. Rick's team moved out of the way while the doctors worked quickly, their gear beeping and whirring. They saw Drake's being taken away by better people. Drake's and the doctors closed the bay doors behind them, making the shuttle quiet. They were going to have to go to court-martial. But when they were on the Resolute, their faces showed something else. One of resolve, knowing that they had picked to save a life over kill one. Admiral Winter's office still had air in it. It seemed like the ship itself was holding its breath. Rick stood at attention, but his boots wouldn't come off the metal floor. From Epsilon 4, he told her everything. The haze, the alien turned blue. It roars. It was just cold facts in his reports, with no feelings. He listened Winters. Her eyes were always on his. The sound of the clock broke in the silence between his words. Her face didn't say anything. She calmed down after he was done. She said that Commander Halloran was not as sharp as before. You didn't follow orders. It shows that there are more to rules than just rules, though. She stopped and looked right through him. At the same time, lights shone on Drake's in the hospital bay. His chest moved slowly up and down. Heartbeat monitors beat to hear it. As people worked on him, they nodded happily. They went through his strange body and put him back together. A shocked and angry doctor told them that he was stabilizing. They both couldn't believe it. Their hard work paid off. Drake's eyes lit up. The world became clear. Machines were running in a white room where he was. Nearby, guards stood alert but not hostile. His hands were not tied. The people kept their distance and were kind. He struggled inside for days. The people he ruled hated humans and were taught to think less of them. People had saved him, though. It bothered him. He stayed focused as the doctors worked to save his life. A guard brought food one night. He said, "We're not that different." A simple statement that Drake agreed with. Winters made up his mind in the office. Your gut told you what to do. Rules aren't always enough. We'll talk about this again, but I will never forget the life that was saved today. Outside, Rick's team waited in a tense state. The door was opened. Rick showed up, blank face. He then gave one quick nod. Everyone let out a joint breath. They did the right thing and came out on the other side. Drake's heard them cheer. It used to make people hate it. It made something else stir. That was the first time he saw them as allies instead of foes. Not the same, but still worthy of respect. He thought about what else he had got wrong about people. It was loud as Rick walked down the halls of the Resolute. His boots hit the metal floor. Others on the crew looked down their noses at him, while others respected him. He walked into the meeting room and stood in front of his people in charge. They stood in a line in front of him with serious looks on their faces in stiff outfits. Their words hit him hard like bullets and shields. People lost their jobs and lives because of what he did at Epsilon the 4th. You saved the life of an enemy, Commander Halloran. A general said that was against the rules. Rick didn't give up. I did it to save a life, sir. There was a lot of anger in the room. His job, his life's work, was in danger. But he already did it, and a life was saved. The noise they were making caught fire behind him as he left the room. Whispers followed him down the halls. He could make out some words in the mess hall. One person said that he took that alien out himself. Another person said that our risky move could have cost us. But that took guts, said a third person in awe. Rick kept walking because he was sure of his choice. Admiral Winters waited for everyone in her office. There was a big choice to be made. As she looked into space, the stars flashed back at her. There was war going on outside, but here there was a chance for peace. Drake's was called in. Drake's walked into the dark room. medals that can be seen on the Admiral's clothing. She was full of power. Drake's, "My men didn't hurt you." Winter said, "This war wears us down. Reach out to your leaders and offer peace." Drake's chest got tight. Inside him, thoughts of betrayal, duty, and the people who saved and guard him. The med bay had wraps around Drax's middle. It hurt to breathe. Thoughts moved around like a storm, traitor, or builder of bridges. Rick came, and I could hear the sound of his boots. "It's right that we saved you. There's been enough war." Rick spoke with a strong voice and looked Drake in the eyes. "Time to build, not break," he said. If they looked at each other, they could understand each other. Drake's let out loud grunts. "It's not just war what we did." Rick agreed more than just that. Drake's rose, their wounds complaining. He said, "I will speak for peace." They made a deal by shaking hands. The hands of humans and Elgathri joined together. There was a lot of talk on the Resolute. Hushid talked more and more about being brave and a new future. In the quiet of space, the Determined continued to sail. Drake stood in front of the people. He talked about friendships formed in battle and lives given a second shot. They gave each other nods of agreement. Rick watched with a mix of pride and fear in his heart. This moment could heal or hurt more. Admiral Winter's voice rose above the noise and said, "History is watching us now. Pick the present that you desire." Rick's group stood behind him like a wall back him up. Drake looked at them, these strange friends, and made up his mind. Even though he was sneaky, he moved toward peace. One choice, one life, one chance to be at peace. A chance. But with each beat, Drake and Rick knew it was the only way to move forward. Rick and Drake's were leaning over a metal table that was full of papers and notepads. Their office was in the small room on the Resolute. The engines of the ship were always humming while they talked very loudly. Writing things down in two languages might help people of different races get along in the future. The two soldiers who helped make peace worked all night under the lights of a screen. Admiral Winters watched her tense team from the command center. She looked at them and saw that they were looking doubtful. She never had any doubts about Rick. There were rumors of doubt going around the group. It was like she had her hands behind her back as she spoke to her cops. She looked at each of them and said, "We're about to make history. What we do here could make the war worse or end it. Believe in Commander Halloran." There were doubts in the command center, but the Admiral's determination made things clear. As soon as the doubters stopped talking, her team stood up straight and got the ship ready for what could be the first step toward peace in the galaxy. Urgent intelligence reports arrived on Winter's desk. They were proud, but after their losses, the Elgathri High Command showed signs of weakness. Reports said they might be ready to talk, which is a good sign that the war might stop. There was a lot of tension in the discussion room between the humans and the Elgathri. Drake's cut through it though when he came in. A person and an Elgathri medal were on his body. Sitting next to Rick showed that people could work together. As Drake sat down, the room became quiet. The talks went on for days. When translators dealt with cultural differences, words both separated and united people. Rick and Drake's fought very hard over trade, land, and technology. Their common goal brought them together. A disagreement over translation stopped one conversation in its tracks. A lot of people looked at Drake's as he leaned in. "Partner is the word we need, not union. Alliance means working together during a war. Peace is also part of partnership." Rick agreed with the change in keywords. The members saw that their careful attention to detail wasn't lost. The two people who used to be enemies spoke out most for togetherness. When words failed, a look between Rick and Drake's eyes spoke volumes. The noise in the room was drowned out by their teamwork. As the days went by, the peace plan took shape with each painful concession. Peace that would last started to grow in the trenches of negotiation, nurtured by hands once holding weapons, but now stretched in friendship. The talks ended as the ship shook very badly. There were alarms, and danger signal was sent out by red lights. Rick's reflexes to stay alive took over. His heart was racing. Not afraid, but ready to act. Drake got up quickly, and awards hit the ground. He made a tough face like a soldier getting ready for war. They looked at each other and agreed to work together to fight this new danger. The ship's shell was torn open by the sound of plasma blasts. It was very rough on the walls. A group that didn't want peace struck. The room turned into a mess. Fear and shock made the delegates run and cry, but Rick and Drake stood strong. Rick yelled, "Move." He pointed his gun at a radical who burst through the door with a plasma gun. Drake fired his foreign weapon as well, and the enemy heard a loud, deep roar. As the soldiers moved forward, they broke down walls. The ship made a lot of noise because of the fighting. Smoke filled the halls and hurt my eyes. Rick and Drake's got through it with a plan based on their past experiences and their shared desire to keep the peace they had worked so hard for. Rick called out, "Left side," dropping an enemy that was about to surprise Drax. Drax grunted back, "High ground," pointing out a good spot for their defense. They met at a point where they could see each other better. Rick tensed up, his finger on the trigger, and enemies appeared out of the darkness. Drake copied his steps as they danced desperately to protect their future. Voices from Rick's team checked in and planned the counterattack through his earpiece. He fought not only for himself, but also for everyone on board and the many lives that were in danger. After the last radical fell, there was silence again. As the adrenaline wore off, the damage, both physical and political, became clear. Reich looked around the burned-out room that could have been a place of peace. He looked into Drex's eyes again. The alien had soot all over its body and was breathing steadily but heavily. Together, they fought off the attack, and their determination protected the seeds of peace they planted. The struggle made them true friends. When the delegates came back, they were shaken but still alive, and they admired Rick and Drake's unity and courage. The attack had made their shared goal stronger. When the crews took over, Rick and Drake stood together, hurt but not broken. Their courage showed what it was possible for two species that used to fight to work together. In the chaos that followed, gossip began. There were hints of a peace that had made it through the first storm. There were hints of hope that got through the darkness. The future was still not safe, but it was in strong hands that were ready to fight for it. The smoke on the old flagship went away. Damage from fighting was shown by walls that were dented and controls that were sparking. The noise stopped. The crew moved around and whispered as they fixed the broken ship. The fight made screens and lights buzz. Drake's and Rick stood tall in the mess, even though they were still dirty from the fight. Rick used his hand to wipe his forehead. Drake stood next to him and didn't care about his hurt arm at this point. They were dressed in uniforms and were shaking as they stared at the screen with the high order. "We don't accept extremists," the high officer yelled. His words rang out. "Their behavior doesn't show what our people are like. We agree with the truce." The human crew nodded, and some of them went back to work. They watched the treaty being signed in the Peace Hall. People from Earth and Elgathri both signed the page, mixing their writing. Each mark in the air was important because it kept them from going to war. Drake's and Rick stood together, their uniforms no longer important. They watched as the leaders nodded and recognized the fighting heart in the other. The crew of the flagship got ready to go home, which was a change from last time. Drake walked in a different way. A guest, not a foe. He stopped at the window and looked up at the stars. It was a peaceful scene after the fight. Drake said in a rough but clear voice, "I never thought I'd truly see the stars with a person." Rick responded with his hands behind his back, "I never thought I'd fight with your kind for a cause bigger than us." Drake didn't look away and said, "Maybe it's time we look beyond our kind." They gave each other an odd nod to show that they had changed their minds. Drake's watched the stars, which stood for fresh starts, as the ship moved. There, signs of a brave and caring future were seen. The sky stretched out in front of Rick and Drake's as they stood on the quiet deck. These two people showed that everyone has the courage and desire to make a difference.